This one is about where a chap had got into a relationship, built a relationship with a lady. He had positioned himself as a charity worker. He was apparently Canadian, but he was in some part of Africa working on a charity project with his young son. He then needed some money, but he wasn't asking her for some money. All he asked was that there was a friend of his in Canada who was going to send money to her, and then could she forward it to him, because for some reason the friend in Canada couldn't send the money direct to him, and she thought that was a bit odd. But the friend in Canada actually sent $1,000 to her, and she thought, gosh, I hardly know this guy, but this friend has sent a real $1,000 to me. So and it was there in her bank account, it was cleared, it was real money. She sent it on to him. He did that again, it waited a month or so, did it again, different amount of money and so forth. And then suddenly there was a big problem. His son was ill. His son was ill and had to go to hospital straight away and needed $4,000 quickly. So he contacted her again and said, my friend in Canada is going to send the money. I need to pay the bill because little Johnny, who we've been talking about, and I've sent you a picture of him and all of that, he's ill. I need the money urgently. Has my friend sent the money? She says, well, the money isn't in my account yet. And the friend says, but I've sent it to you. It must be on its way. She trusts him now, so she sends the £4,000. Everybody disappears. Job done. End of it. These guys they think this through. They know what they're doing. They use technology. They use relationships. They know that trust is key, and they're very, very smart. And one of the key things in that is building relationships, building identities, which they'll do, and which people do. They'll either build or steal identities by putting the pieces of information, the pieces of the jigsaw together. I once did some work to say, given, this was for a TV program a while back, I went onto the streets of Brighton and they said, go up to people and get their name, just their name, have an assessment of how old you think they are, but don't ask them, just get their name and see whether you could find enough information to steal their identity, information that's publicly available, not by hacking into anything, but just by what's out there. And I found that in about 30% of cases, for 30% of the people in this room, if you make the mistake afterwards of telling me your name, if I wanted to, I could probably find enough information to replicate your identity and apply for something. But then you might say, oh well, I'll need a utility bill with your address on it, and I'll say, yes, that's a very good point. It might take me almost 5 minutes to scan a utility bill and edit it and print one out, well, if you order something from a shop, it's going to come to my address, isn't it? Yes, that's a good point. I might have to redirect your mail for a while so that it comes to my address instead of your address. And these guys have all sorts of techniques that they can use, and they'll generally, if they can, people used to create identities. If you're doing sort of phishing emails and all the rest of it, you'd make up an identity. But now increasingly, people are stealing other people's identities to do it, because then if someone sort of searches around to say, I got this rather dodgy email from someone called Tom Ilube, does this Tom Ilube exist? You go and look on the web, oh yes, he does exist, and so forth. So I know there's a lawyer in London whose identity has been used over and over again for this, to the extent that on the website he has to say, here's my bio and all the rest, and by the way, if you get an email from me telling you that I'm representing a client and you should send me this money, it's not me. People will take existing identities and make use of them for all sorts of reasons. Sham marriages is a good one. The guys will take an identity. You're gonna marry someone off so that someone can get their right to stay in the UK. You need to marry them to a real person. You're obviously not going to marry them to yourself. So sometimes you'll go and steal someone else's identity and you'll marry them to that person. So congratulations, you may be married and not even know it yet. In fact, I did an interview. I did an interview once for a magazine. I can't remember what it was. A ladies, quite a sort of slightly racy ladies magazine, and I sort of talked about this point. And when the article came out, the article said, "Good news, girls, you might be married to a big beefy builder and not even know it yet." And I thought, no, that's not quite the point I was trying to make. But then on the sort of slightly more worrying side, terrorists will use identities. If you're going to be a terrorist trying to move around the world, you're not going to use your own identity. You're going to steal someone else's identity. The widow of the 7/7 bomber that's being sort of hunted around Kenya and so forth is apparently using an identity of a young lady in a nurse in Essex she just picked up her identity. Imagine if that young lady, that nurse, happened to be trying to fly to the States or something. The world of pain that she would get into when she arrived at the airport with her identity being used. So, our identities are under threat as well from all sorts of sources. So the fraudulent type of cybercriminal is smart, relentless, very, very efficient, and just gets on with the job. And it's a way of life for them. They really don't particularly think of it as crime. It doesn't feel much like crime. It feels like you're taking some money off people who are either too stupid or have too much money anyway, so what's the big deal? The other guys are the geek cybermen, that type of cybercriminal. These guys are very, very smart. If you think of the smartest person you know, and then you think of the smartest person that guy knows, you're probably in the territory of the sort of people who do this type of cybercrime for a living. They are very, very, very clever guys. They're very technical. These are the guys who are doing the hacking and all the rest of it. They'll break passwords. I mean, there are all sorts of different techniques to tackle this sort of thing, and a whole kind of language to itself. The brute force attack, where you're trying to break someone's password. I once worked for an organization, and we use this type of attack internally just to see how many of the organization's passwords we could crack, and we found that we could crack about 80% of them. 80% of the people who thought they'd set up really good passwords, within seconds you crack them. People will use a word, for example. Well, a brute force attack basically says, I'm going to take every dictionary and I'm going to run through every single dictionary in seconds or in minutes and try every single one of them. Or you could get really clever. You could say, I'm going to use a word, but instead of an I, I'm going to use a 1, or instead of a O, I'm going to use a 0, or something like that, because the hackers will never think of that. Well, guess what? They'll just do the same sort of attack, but after they've done it with proper words, they'll then start replacing things, and they'll do it over and over again. And eventually, for a huge number of people, passwords will get broken with that sort of attack. One of the easy things to do is just use multiple words, because if I'm doing a brute force attack and you've chosen Venus chair, well, that just multiplies the problem by a huge amount, because I'm not going to take every dictionary and multiply it by every other dictionary and so forth. So there are ways to make your password still very memorable, but much more complicated to break. There are things like man-in-the-middle attacks, where basically what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to stand in the middle, so you think you're talking to that website, you're actually talking to me, I'm talking to the website's talking to me, I'm talking back to you, I'm sitting in the middle somewhere, and I'm seeing all the traffic that goes through, and I'm taking a copy of all the bits of traffic that are of interest to me. Particularly if the type of cybercrime that I'm into is sort of wireless oriented. I've seen guys sit on a train with a piece of equipment that you can buy for a few £100 and sit there with their laptop and be able to see people's wireless laptops up and down the train, because people's wireless laptops aren't secure. You can drive down a street and see people's wireless laptops, so wireless devices open. You can see, if you've got a wireless router at home, you probably haven't changed the password. I probably know what the password is. The password is probably password, or it might be admin. If you go home and you pick up your router and turn it upside down, there'll be a sticker on it that tells you what the password is, and they all have the same one. So I might be able to find a way in that way. There are key loggers, there are Trojans. I might drop a piece of software on your PC that when you press A, the letter A gets sent to me. When you press HSBC, HSBC gets sent to me. These things sit there all the time. In the early days, people were sort of using these sorts of techniques in order to show off, to show how clever they were. So I'll send out a worm and it'll mess up everyone's machine, or it'll write some pretty pictures on the front of the machine. Nowadays, if I'm this sort of hacker, I'm doing it for money.